You're listening to Find the Good News, episode 28, The Short End of the Stick, featuring Laura Grantham Broussard. This episode of Find the Good News is sponsored by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. Check out our work at parkerbrandup.com. Before I press play on the new episode of Find the Good News, I want to let you know about the episode coming out next week featuring Carl and Chelsea Boudreau, the owners of the Yoga Center in Lake Charles and Stellar Beans. After that, I've got Irvin Luke, the Lake Charles City Parks Program Manager, Adelie Cormier, local historian and the author of Lost Lake Charles, and Diana Valette, a local Catholic blogger and speaker. All of those conversations are absolutely wonderful. I got a lot out of them, and I hope that you guys will get a lot out of them too. I want to remind you all that I'm making this show as much for you as I'm making it for me. Moving forward, I'll be making an extra effort to post upcoming guests and episode information ahead of time on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. That'll give everybody an opportunity to use the listener hotline that I've set up. I set that up so you could send me voicemails or text messages. Let me know what you think about the show. You'll be able to ask guests questions. You'll be able to submit questions that I'll put into the fishbowl. And if you've been listening to the show, you know that diving into the fishbowl has been a lot of fun, but I really want to keep that populated with new, fresh content. If you send it to me through text, I'll print it out and I'll drop it in the fishbowl and we'll see what happens. Also, just let me know what you think about the show, or if you've got concerns about the show, or if we've talked about something on the show that you want to add something to. I'll be happy to play anything that's appropriate or relevant on the show and let some of the guests respond as well. And you might be able to hear something that you've submitted played. I think that kind of feedback is going to be really important to the future of the show. I want you guys to feel that you have an investment in it, I don't want you to just have to listen to us. The idea is that you're able to share your thoughts, and that if you have something relevant to add to the conversation, I want you to be able to do that. So that hotline is 802-459-1668. It's 802-459-1668. If nothing else, just send me a message and let me know what you think. I really do appreciate the feedback. I get a lot of DMs and emails and text messages from people who are listening to the show, and people are really building some more intimate relationships with some of the conversations that they've listened to. So I think it's really valuable. And again, you can find that number on the website. That's www.findthegood.news. You can hit that there, or you can submit me an email there as well. One last thing that's really important to a little podcast like this are your reviews and feedback. It's absolutely the best way that you can support something like the Good News. Whatever platform you're using, whether it's Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, anywhere that we've got the show posted, just go on there and take a minute to just give it a like, or just leave an honest review. That kind of stuff helps in the rankings, and it's going to help get the show out to more people. That's all I got right now. It's time to press play on a little good news. Sometimes, to talk about good things, we need to talk about bad things. We have to go into the darkness of the cave, but make sure we're lighting lanterns along the way so we can find our way out. Laura Grantham Broussard sat down with me for a visit on Find the Good News, and our conversation was a bit like that. Laura caught my eye online because she was one of the few voices ringing out in our area, taking an active position of compassion and mercy for immigrants and asylum seekers. She's one of the ones lighting those lanterns on the way into the cave. If I'm being honest, I typically feel a good bit of fear when the subject of migrants, foreigners, asylum seekers, or border walls come up. These are volatile times, and as a past guest of the show once said, you can't change anyone's mind anymore. Still, that's one of the unwritten missions of this little show, isn't it? Shouldn't we all make an effort to have honest and elevated conversations, even uncomfortable conversations, that might cause a shift in thinking or a change of heart? I'd say that's the kind of conversation I have with Laura in this episode. She speaks frankly about the immediate needs of the families that she serves through the Immigrant Families Together network, and reveals many of the catalysts for their migration to safer lands. What I really love about Laura Broussard is that she's actually doing something. She's not sitting on the sidelines. She's using her voice on new media networks to help bend the bow towards social justice. But she's also putting actual energy into serving our brothers and sisters. these children of creation, and that's what they are, manifesting resources for families that are totally at the mercy of a stranger's kindness. That hope for kindness is not what they always receive. Laura has that unique knack for looking at history to help generate her compassion. Because she can see where she's come from, she can see others as herself, and in turn, treat them as she would want to be treated. She sees the common ground that we all share, the things that bind us, and that many of the comforts and securities we enjoy simply come from being born in the right place at the right time. Good old-fashioned luck. It's easy to find voices stirring the pot with the long end of the stick. Voices that use degrading rhetoric that dehumanizes immigrants, making their troubles easier to disregard. Laura understands that they are people, just like you and I. They're the ones getting the short end of the stick in this pot we stir with our words. Laura, all of the locals that support her efforts, and the Immigrant Families Together network are using their words and works to help these people in desperate situations. Maybe there are lanterns hanging along the walls of the deep, dark cave. Maybe there's a light on the outside as well. Maybe people like Laura are helping to transform these dark spaces into comfortable and safe homes filled with love, friends, and resources. For mothers and fathers wandering far from their homes and wondering what's next, I believe it's the good news they've been praying and hoping for.
Wake up, it's morning. You're dreaming up a story. I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep on the path to your deliverance, and a holy wall of light pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you just want to shut it all down and get no news at all. With Find the Good News, I aim to change that by focusing on good people doing good work. I visit with artists, educators, civic and spiritual leaders, musicians, business owners, students, volunteers, and everyday citizens who are using their creativity, resources, and talents to bring hope and happiness to their corner of the world. In each episode, I dig into the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have street-level conversations about relatable things going on in their lives, discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that are anchoring them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of news in the world. My name is Oran Parker, and I'm going to find the good.
And I love you just as well.
I don't usually have any kind of warm-up. We just jump right in.
Oh my goodness.
I know. I like it that way. I wasn't sure how I wanted to do that. And, a lot of people I just sabotage, don't even know we're recording.
That's wild.
Yeah, but it makes it more natural because I wanted this show to feel, I know it sounds crazy, but almost like first date-ish.
Oh, okay.
Two people really trying to get to know each other.
Yeah.
Because, I know you online.
Right.
But that's all I know.
Right.
And a lot of people are pretty revealing online. You get a vibe, some people are too revealing online. But no, I would say too. I guess it all depends.
Yeah, on your
what does that mean to you?
Boundary.
Yeah. That's partly why I started. I'm cautious online. Okay. So, and you might be too. I'm curious to hear about that. But so I will go online and I've kind of learned to go, ooh, I like what that person said, right? Kind of piques my interest.
Yeah.
I used to, years ago, I'd go, ooh, friend request immediately. Bad idea. I've learned to go now, okay, let me go see a little bit more of a track record and get a look, And so that's kind of what happened with you. Other people were either people I knew were commenting on something you would post, or maybe sharing something you would post. And I was like, okay, this is piquing my interest. And then the more that was consistently, and I
do like to curate a little bit of a public presence that is good for networking. Because I work in social media and branding for an eco-friendly baby brand in Montana.
So that's what you do.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Okay, I was going to ask. I didn't know.
I work from home. I've done it for the last 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And, that's
eco-friendly baby brand.
Mm-hmm. We mostly, our core competency is cloth diapers.
Right on.
Yeah.
That's a huge issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can change just one thing like that and make a huge impact.
It makes a difference.
Yeah. I was reading an article I guess yesterday, and it just kind of brought the word back into the forefront of my mind, which was flexitarian, where,
right.
And I would say, yeah, that's probably what me and my wife are. I was a vegetarian for 5 or 6 years when I was in my 20s, and then I slowly tiptoed back to being a carnivore. But now we're more, maybe once or twice a week have some meat. Yeah. Or a lot of times we'll just go weeks with just eating fish.
And that makes a big difference in the greenhouse gas emissions of farms.
Yeah. I mean, we're hanging on to some old ways that just aren't going to work anymore.
Right.
Yeah. But all of that, well, I didn't know any of that about the green baby brand, eco-friendly baby brand. And we'll probably talk more about that. But what really piqued my interest was your work with immigrants. Yeah. Because for one, it's such a hot button that people like to push. And you get opinions all over the spectrum.
You do.
People have different ways of justifying their stances on it, whether they be political or spiritual or religious or whatever.
Right.
And I don't know. I would say everything I've seen you post, and this, again, I don't just want to bring people on this show that I have like-minded nature with, but I would say we're in alignment.
Yeah.
And I found it refreshing because I don't hear many voices in our area in favor of helping immigrants.
My interest in human migration patterns basically started in childhood because my mom's hobby is genealogy. And so, like most people from around here, I am a descendant of Acadians and Germans.
Yeah.
Corsican Italians, some French, and then on my dad's side, mostly just the colonial settlers who settled the original 13 colonies. So it's just always struck me learning about the history, especially of my Francophone ancestors, that, and my husband, we can trace his lineage back to Laura Broussard himself.
Okay.
Who, came here. He led, the Acadian people when they were exiled. He led them first to Haiti and then eventually negotiated a place for us in Louisiana. But we were regarded as outsiders. We were given land that was not good for farming, that deep south bayou land in southeast Louisiana. We were considered not skilled enough to be able to have farmland. We were not white enough to go to school with white children. Because I don't know if you know this, but the Acadian people, the French settlers who settled in Acadie were mostly poor men looking for economic opportunity, and where they settled, they integrated themselves into the Mi'kmaq tribe in Canada. And so Greater Canada referred to the Acadians and still refers to the Acadian families up there as Métis people, which is
I didn't know that.
Mixed race people, yes. And so you'll hear people talk about Cajuns, and I know I have one daughter with very dark hair, and people will say, well, there's your Cajun baby. But, our culture has come to really value whiteness and blondness. Jolie Blanc is our national anthem.
Oh, yeah. No, right? You're right.
So that colorism has helped us to assimilate. But when we got here, we were not regarded as white people. And it was many, many generations. Basically, when our great-grandfathers were able to interpret during the World Wars, is when, we became valued and regarded as American.
Yeah.
And so it was many, many, many generations where we had no interest at all in assimilating or in even really learning English beyond what we had to get by.
Yeah.
And we all have the stories of our great-grandparents being beaten at school.
Sure.
For speaking French at school when the law really started to get tough about people needing to assimilate into English culture in South Louisiana. I guess it's probably been since, was it the early 2000s when you would start to hear the comedians say, why do I have to press 1 for English?
Yeah.
That I almost immediately, just by luck and virtue of, conversations with my mother, realized, okay, so 3 generations ago, that was my family that would have been the butt of those jokes.
Yeah.
And So that's kind of the beginning of my interest in migration. And like most little nerdy girls in the 1990s, I read a lot of diaries of refugees, like the Diary of Anne Frank, Zlata's diary. So, I was interested in those like human interest stories from a young age. And so, I don't know, it all sort of came together in the last several years. I'm lucky that my children go to the magnet school.
Okay.
Where we have a lot of immigrant families.
Really? Okay.
Yes, because families who come here from the Middle East, and mostly from the Middle East, but also from Asia, to work at the plants or in the medical system, will often get their kids. Their academics are important to them, and their kids go to Cooley, and my son plays chess. So, all the stereotypes about chess are there for a reason. Like, it's really an international language.
Yeah.
And so my son's friends, through his friends, I've met parents, and, one of my best friends is a Palestinian asylee.
Oh, really?
Yes. So we'll get together and do, like, a big spread of, like, Cajun and Mediterranean food, and like you'll have a peach cobbler next to kunafa, which is a Palestinian dessert, and umali, which is a Egyptian dessert, because we have an Egyptian friend.
Okay.
Like, I've been to mosques with them, they've been to churches with me. We took a trip to Washington, D.C. and New York, and I went to this beautiful Turkish mosque with them outside of D.C. And then when we went to New York, everybody came with me to Mass that was in Arabic. It was the Divine Liturgy of the Maronite Rite.
Okay.
So it's in Arabic and Aramaic. So
oh, wow. What an experience.
Let me tell you, to hear the words of consecration in the language that Jesus would have been speaking at the Last Supper was, it was a very profound experience.
Bet. Yeah.
And then to share that with friends, even friends of other faiths, they're so connected to the region that the story is important to them.
Yeah, sure.
As well.
Sure.
So, I have a lot of interest in just migration, immigration, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm kind of like an old school conservative on this, in that, like, okay, I know this is a post 9/11 world, and that, security threats are I don't want to downplay that. I know that many people have that on their minds when they talk about this issue of securing the borders.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm kind of an old school conservative in that I feel like, at least on this issue, that as open and free as borders can be, that's how open and free they should be.
I see.
Because migration is like the natural state of things for humans. And it should be regarded as a human right. If people can pull together the resources to get somewhere that they want to go, they should be able to.
Yeah.
And on an immediate level, immigration is good for markets. It's good for society because it helps us to cultivate empathy. It teaches us to celebrate both our common humanity and our differences. And, I think that this is truly what people... I don't know why they're afraid of it.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question. Why do you think people are afraid of it? Why do you think that it's not celebrated? Why is it? Why does it upset people so much?
I think that people feel like because our resources can be limited, that it's like this immediate zero-sum game, and they can't be shared, and our job market can't sustain an influx. But, like, we're a capitalist country, and isn't that the idea? Like, that the market will be able to shake itself out, work itself out?
It's the idea, yeah. Yeah.
So, and I also see a lot of propaganda out there about immigrants coming and getting on, like, say, like, SNAP resources, and then, like, doing a bunch of shopping with their SNAP, and then like stocking their stores with that, and then sending all the money back to their home country, which doesn't make any sense at all. Like, if somebody immigrates here, they are building their own family's wealth to be able to get established. But also, like, people just don't do that. Like, if they qualify for SNAP, it's because they need to feed their families.
Right, they have an immediate need.
Right, exactly. That's how you qualify. And this is propaganda that's definitely viral. It taps into something for people, you know, that fear of being eliminated or something.
Yeah. It's an old human problem.
It is.
It's
It
ancient.
is.
I mean, it's like it's buried in us somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, but now good things are buried in us too. But like
That's
this, when you have voices out there that can just pluck that out and overshadow, or worse than overshadowing your good parts, twist them up to where you feel emboldened and you feel like you're doing good work, and it's actually at the detriment of a whole race of people or immigrants or whoever the labeled bad guy or villain of the story is. It's like that it just plays on the old feel of an us versus them. It's like somewhere inside there are people that just know this and just pull it out. For what purpose, I don't know. It's almost like there's profit in chaos.
Yeah. There's a certain nihilism, I think, behind a lot of like the nationalism that's really taking hold in not just American political discourse, but all over Europe too. And yeah, I don't know what the
it's hard.
goal really is. Some of the propaganda makes it look like it's about shoring up our families and, you know, making sure that our cultures aren't erased. And like, white people aren't really at risk of being erased.
Right. Well, I don't.
And we've
that's an
already
interesting
done
fear.
a whole lot of integration, so that like there are lots of things that have already kind of faded, and you really only find them at like cultural festivals, sort of, or museums. So I don't know. I just feel like immigration on its face is not good or bad. It's just what it is. It's just the state of things.
Yeah. It's a weird human
Birds do it too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's funny because that's what I was thinking. Birds do it. Nature does it. And, you know, I don't know. Have you ever read this book? And if you haven't, I would suggest it. It's called Ishmael. There was
That's a novel?
Yeah. There was a movie that was kind of made off of it. It was not as good, but with Anthony Hopkins, where he lived with the gorillas. But the guy lays out in this book, you know, he calls them takers and leavers, and he talks a lot about where we begin to see sort of the fall of humanity, right? Whenever people started farming the land versus traveling and migrating from place to place with the seasons, and going from a hunter-gatherer to, you know, agriculture. And so it's a really convincing argument. I mean, what he paints, you'll see where people begin to settle and farm the land. Then you begin to see the control of nature, where we get this idea that, well, there's an intrusion, and so we need to put a barrier. You know, this doesn't grow next to this, and so it's just an old mindset that gets put in us. And then he goes to play it forward that this idea of intrusion, and this is mine, that's yours. There's only so much here. We've settled here. This is now ours, versus the nomadic lifestyle. It bred war, famine, hatred. I mean, he goes on and on.
It's fascinating because the rise of agriculture is also what brought us written language.
Interesting.
I read a book in college by David Abram called The Spell of the Sensuous that discusses the turn from an animistic religion to the more formal beginnings of the Hebrew faith, of the Israelite faith, the Jewish faith, and the rise of the Hebrew language.
Interesting.
Going along with the rise of agriculture and settling.
Yeah.
And I wish I could remember more about it. That was in 2004.
So it sounds to me like you have like that kind of view, and then you have this other view, but somehow now we're left to sort of pick at the pieces in our time period.
Our time.
There's all these different opposing ideas about that, which we definitely want the written language, the beauty of that, and all the things that come from it. I was talking about this with my wife. I don't know where I'd read it, but there were some arguments they were showing where if you go back every generation, there's always some demonized form of communication, where it was the television, and it was before that was the radio, and then you go back and there's even writings where Plato and Socrates argued about written language, and you shouldn't be writing this stuff down. You should learn it orally, and so the writing down of philosophy was demonized. Like this is a bad thing, and I thought, man, every generation paints the next form of communication as
novels
bad.
Used to be trash.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty interesting how that just seems coded into us, which, and I don't want to believe it is coded into us, but it just keeps repeating, rinse and repeat in new forms.
I don't know if it's that we don't like what's new, or we don't like what young people do first, or what it is. I don't know. But so I have spent the last 10 years having children. So I have 5 kids.
Wow. How old are you?
I'm 32.
32. Wow.
We got married young. I married my middle school sweetheart.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I don't hear that too often. I've met a few high school sweethearts.
We met in the lunch line at St. Margaret in 6th grade.
Oh, wow, man. That's awesome.
So, we have 5 children. We have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, twins who will be 6 next month, and then the baby will be 3 in May.
Wow.
So I'm finally at a place in my life where I have the bandwidth to do more than just run my mouth on social media. So that's kind of what's led me to actually working in the community with immigrants and doing some networking with immigrant rights activists.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing that?
Not that long.
Not that long.
No.
So this is when does that start for you?
When it first came to broader public attention that the administration had chosen, the executive administration of the U.S. had chosen to stop immigrants at the border and detain the parents in ICE detainment centers, but then keep the children in shelters, or in some cases put them in the foster care system. So when families were being separated, some people up in, I think, New York started an organization called Immigrant Families Together. And that name sort of emerged after they started the work. But the work was basically raising, as quickly as possible, bond money to bond a parent out of detainment. And then, because their children were usually kept states away, and ICE did not cover plane fare or anything like that, also raise the money for plane fare to reunite them, and then to help them find housing. Okay. So Immigrant Families Together started as that, and it's kind of grown so that the work that it does is a little broader now. But basically what has happened is that there are there's the southern region, there's the Midwest region, there's the Northeast region. I think California has its own. But basically people will network. So when someone working in a shelter, volunteering in a shelter. Okay. And so what the shelters are is if someone gets to the border, turns themselves in, pleads asylum, which they have a legal right to do, at least right now. And they say, I have a relative willing to sponsor me. Okay. ICE checks that out. If they verify that it's true, they kind of turn them loose. Okay. And so shelter workers are there at the border or, near the ICE center ready to guide them to a shelter. And El Paso has a lot of the shelters right now. So basically, when people who are volunteering in the shelter find out, get to know the people who are there, and they're helping them to get bus tickets to get to their destination. When there's someone coming to Lake Charles, they let me know.
Okay. Because you're in their network.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's right. And they know I'm in Lake Charles. So basically, when people have a sponsor here, they get on a bus, and then a few days later, like, I know about when to expect them. It's about 3 days from El Paso, for example. Okay. I know about when to expect them. They've given the shelter worker that they trust, who's in contact with me, a phone number.
Okay.
To contact them. And so I just send a text. I use Google Translate. Like, it's the first app on my phone
works
now. I
really
need
good
it. Yeah,
for that?
I mean, it does what it needs to do. I took French in school.
Oh, really?
That's what we were encouraged to do. I went to a magnet school where we took French.
Isn't that interesting? Through. It's a flip. Your ancestors were encouraged to not speak it. Now we're trying to.
Well, and Codafil tried to revive it, and that's why we have the French programs. And honestly, French immersion is codified into Louisiana law now since, I think, 2008, 2007, as a student. It's a student's right to have access to French immersion.
Wow.
But yeah, I do wish I had learned Spanish, and the grammar is very similar, so I can. I'm kind of learning as I go, but I don't know that I'll ever be able to, like, conjugate verbs on the fly or anything like that. But that's what the app is for, and it does the job. So, but I send a text and, like, get an idea of what people need. I create an Amazon registry, and then I kind of seed that out. I'm always careful to protect identities.
Sure.
You just never know who's gonna see what you're putting out there.
Yeah, and you're trying to protect those families, because there are.
But I also have to do a lot of outreach, and sometimes it feels a little solicity, like.
You mean like asking
people to donate
to help? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do it. I got 5 kids to raise.
Right.
And
do you get any blowback from that?
I have not.
Really?
No.
That's people just really good to hear.
Help, or I guess they ignore it if they, don't think people should be here or should be helped or given handouts or whatever they.
That's incredible.
Think.
I'm glad to hear that. But I'm surprised by that, actually.
I am too. And a lot of locals have been people helping, but I also have a wide network because of my job and just because of, like, the Catholic internet and social justice internet and just whatever. So I have a lot of people who will spread the word, spread the link to the registry. I just use my old baby registry from when
it makes sense.
When I was pregnant with my twins, and that way it's kind of not obvious, what it's for, because it's a public registry. But yeah, I just fill their needs. So families coming here from Central America think it's really cold here right now.
Oh, really?
And so they need heaters and warm blankets.
What do they say? I mean, you can't say where, I'm sure, but like what's the situation? I mean, the living situation when they get here.
When they get here, they're staying with their sponsors.
Okay.
But their sponsors are not usually established enough to really provide for them, and they can't work for 180 days.
So they're at the mercy of
whoever can help. Yep. And I think that churches are really feeling the need. I don't know for sure, but people I've talked to have said, yes, I went to the church, and I don't know what church, but I went to the church, and they helped with this or that. So they do what they can. Yeah. And I know we have La Familia Resource Center, which offers language classes and citizenship classes. I don't know how connected they are to the immigration lawyer we have here in town, but if you are listening, Ashley 4ADs, get in touch with me. I have questions for you.
So who is that you just mentioned? What is?
I don't know her.
Okay.
She went to St. Louis a little bit before I did.
Okay.
So I know who her family is.
I see.
And she's an immigration lawyer, and her website is interesting, and I know that good legal advice is really necessary. And like feeling like they have the backing of an attorney who really has gotten to know them is what gets asylum seekers to show up for their hearings. And you hear a lot of people say, well, once they get in, once they're released, they disappear.
Out in the wild, it's unknown.
They disappear.
Disappear into society, right?
Well, yes and no. People who are in total culture shock, and coming from countries that don't have as sophisticated an immigration court system as we have, they don't necessarily understand. And not to say that they're intellectually incapable, but it's just kind of beyond their like cultural grasp that they have to show up on this date, and so they need, you know, supportive people,
sure,
to help them make sure that they do these things.
Because
otherwise there's a huge temptation to stay under the radar, and I can totally understand why. I don't like to show up to renew my driver's license.
Right.
You know what
That's
I mean?
what I was going to say. That's kind of what I thought. I was like, I know people who stay under the radar who live in our society, who are not immigrants, and they don't want anybody, you know, they don't want to integrate with anything like that.
Right.
So or have any kind of entanglement with it. You know, they're staying off the radar too.
And I'm happy, I know it.
You've probably heard me mention filming videos, building websites, creating logos, or building brands on this podcast. Well, there's a good reason for that. I'm a brand builder, and my brand is Parker Brand Creative Services. My team and I have built countless brands in the Gulf Coast region, and a lot of our work in the travel and tourism industry is experienced across the country and honestly the whole world. We have our specialties: web, logo, package, and whole brand design, as well as video production and photography. But the reality is, we function as a full-service advertising agency to businesses that don't really mesh well with larger advertising agencies or just don't want to have in-house creative departments. But don't listen to what I say. Just go to our website, parkerbrandup.com, and take a look at what we do. We're a show it, don't say it team. Okay, you should definitely say it too, but you know what I mean. That's parkerbrandup.com. We think sideways, we push forward, and we'll get your brand up.
So take this, you've earned it, a melody in chorus.
I'm just listening to this and just thinking about it in my own life. I just try to imagine myself in this situation.
Same.
You know, I've traveled potentially on foot with very little, you know, for a long, long time with children, for whatever horrible, whatever horrible thing you're leaving. And then you get there and you don't know how long it'll be before you can even apply for asylum, if you even are allowed to in the current situation. You finally...
Everything you're hearing is filtered through rumors that people are telling you, you know, in your WhatsApp text messages. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're not really clear on what you're going to encounter when you get there.
Right. So they do that. Then they're potentially separated from their children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is emotionally...
Or you've left your spouse and baby back at home. And
they
you know,
really
because
don't
the
know.
journey's too hard for them, and you don't know when you're going to get them here.
They don't even really always know what's happened to you, really.
Right.
I mean, right? You don't have like some...
I mean, people use WhatsApp and, you know,
Really?
other ways of tech. Yeah.
So there is a communication network taking place.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I didn't know that.
Yes.
I mean,
if people are able to get a smartphone and data, you know, and get a data plan, they can use WhatsApp, and that's free. So we don't need to worry about like calling card minutes and things like we worried about in the 90s. Like, I traveled to Europe with friends when I was young, with an immigrant family. They were from Italy.
Wow.
And I went back to Italy with them, and I had to have a calling card with minutes to call my mom.
Yeah, I remember
Dad.
those.
Yeah, so WhatsApp lets you text or video call if there's good enough connection or whatever.
Yeah. So they're able to communicate then and stay in touch with their family. Well, that's good.
Yes, it is, but it's still not the same.
Well, sure. I mean, most of us out here, wouldn't want to have to do that.
No.
You know, I mean, finding a signal, finding data, whatever you have to do. I mean, that's stuff you see people doing that are, you know, I see people do it at the park or wherever they're sleeping, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing that.
Right.
You know, I'm used to having access to data and communication. Mm-hmm. I can get in touch with my wife over something trivial like, you know, we're out of milk or bread. Right.
And you come home to her
and I go home, you know, I have a place to sleep. I can't imagine going through all of that. And then, you know, what's the percentage of folks who actually get through all of that and then actually end up in a network like what you're a part of?
Well, recently, a family that I was matched with, there were about 45 families in the shelter at the same time as them. They were the only ones who got matched with support.
So 1 out of 45 in that situation.
Yeah. And some places New Orleans has a pretty good immigration activism network, and the people there tend to mobilize and bring the support. San Francisco has a great one, and also their court system is the friendliest, probably, toward granting asylum for migrants from Central America. Locally, I've heard that Louisiana does not have great receptivity. Our immigration courts don't have great receptivity to allowing, granting asylum status to Central American migrants.
Really?
I have friends who are asylees, but they're Palestinian, so they're stateless. When you're stateless, you have a pretty ironclad case for asylum.
Yeah.
You don't.
There's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to deport you to.
Right. How much of what you do gets filtered, is framed by, not filtered through, but is framed by your faith?
That's an interesting question. I'm Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not always the best Catholic.
What do you mean by that? I'm going to stop you right there. What do you mean by you're not always the best Catholic? Because I'm so
jaded by the hierarchy right now, unrelated to immigration, because what the bishops have said about immigration has been great. But it's like, you're not doing us any favors when you talk about this very politically unpopular stance you've got, but you're also covering for just decades and decades of sexual misconduct and abuse.
Yeah.
You're not doing me any favors.
It's hard,
so I
right?
wish
You
would
defend the
just
one, but
shut up, Bishop DiNardo. So
so that's what you mean, yeah? Like you don't always agree with the hierarchy.
Well, the actions of the hierarchy are not the teachings of the church, of course, but I don't know. It's sometimes difficult to remain, but
But you do.
But I do.
And why?
The Eucharist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
That's the answer.
That's it.
No, I understand.
That's it. But
you can't walk, once you know that, you can't walk away from that.
I know. And I have said before that I have visited beautiful mosques, and I'm sure that in synagogues I would feel the same way. Like, I get the same, elevated spiritual, I don't want to say feeling. It's not a feeling, but it's a transcendental experience.
An awareness of what's... Yeah.
Of what's greater than us in these other beautiful buildings, the same way that I feel, in the cathedral.
Yeah.
So I always say like a basic Abrahamic monotheism is definitely what I know to be true. And the Eucharist is the anchor that keeps me believing that this expression of that monotheism is, the correct one. But I flirt with universalism a lot, which is a heresy.
Yeah,
but
I understand. I do too.
Yeah.
I understand. I've had to learn to live with that cloak, I guess.
Yeah.
And not,
But so, back to immigration. As it goes, I have a lot of Muslim friends. So much of Islam is about service and hospitality, and that is obviously, hospitality is also a Christian virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And I love being able to provide hospitality to Muslims, receive hospitality from Muslims, provide it alongside Muslims to other, just other people in the community. And I see a really big opening for some ecumenical work in our community or in any small town America.
Yeah.
If people would be open to it and not be so suspicious of each other.
Do you think all of that goes back to just 9/11 and that?
Mostly.
Yeah.
I think before 9/11, a lot of us didn't know what Islam was.
Yeah.
I didn't really.
No, I think you're right, because look, I mean, I would say as a younger person, before I really knew what it was, my exposure was movies.
Yeah.
You know, Robin Hood
Right.
with Kevin Costner. I knew that was, you know, in the movie, but I didn't really I didn't go study the Crusades or anything like that,
Right.
and understand, you know, what any of that meant.
Right.
You know, so you just of course sort of accept that as part of the fabric of of life, and you move on. You know.
Right.
And then when a tragedy occurs, it sort of paints everything.
It really did, and that extremism is obviously a scary thing. And like,
But I'd say we see that same
people
extremism
become radicalized. Yeah, we see it
in everything.
in
You can
everything.
find it in any.
You can. And the internet is a scary place sometimes, and I've run into people who, like, proudly are not in jail anymore, but they did time in prison because they bombed an abortion clinic or attempted to assassinate, a doctor who performed late-term abortions, and they still feel like they were doing the good work.
Justified, yeah.
And radicalized, people who claim to stand for Islam, they also, seem to believe that they're doing the good work. So we, I think, have to have some moral clarity on what the good work actually is. And if the good work is about, like, protecting a label that you proudly belong to, like, I don't really want a part of that.
Yeah, no,
You know what I mean?
Totally understand what you're saying. Yeah,
I don't really think that that's the gospel. I don't think that that's in the Quran, from what I've read of it. I definitely don't think that it's in the Hebrew scriptures, where God reminds the Hebrews so often that they were strangers in the land of Egypt. I think that pride of culture is good, but you can't get it twisted. It can't have primacy over hospitality or just openness to learning.
yeah. Now this weekend I was I'll rewatch 7 Years in Tibet. It's been several years since I watched it, and there's one scene in the movie. Have you ever seen that film?
I have not.
It's really wonderful. I think it is. And there's a scene in there where, if you go read the political history of Tibet, they had gotten to a point where they didn't allow any foreigners at all. Their
Right.
borders were shut
Right.
off. So it kind of created this mystery around it. It was hard to get to, first
Right.
of all. But that all really came through a bunch of political problems where the British were trying to claim rights and
Right.
Chinese were trying to claim rights. So the 13th Dalai Lama basically shut the borders.
Right.
And so when I was younger and I would study that, I thought it was fine. He shut the borders. And now I'm living in my country is sort of
Wants
in
to
the
shut
same
the borders.
situation. And I'm like, it's just interesting how I had sympathy for the Tibetan culture at that time, and I kind of related to them. But now that it's happening here, I've changed my thinking.
There's a little bit of a power dynamic difference there,
Yeah.
though, in that
Talking about a land grab is what was
Right.
trying to happen.
Was
yeah.
trying to happen. And people, even the president has tried to frame it that way, like that people are coming and they're invaders, and he read that poem about the snake at his rallies, and no, it's really more like what the Acadians did.
Yeah, I think you're
honestly,
right. It's like that.
They're not necessarily exiles, but they're running from, when imagine this city, and it's not going to happen just because we let immigrants come here, but imagine this city or your village. You live in Iway or Fenton, and the local law enforcement and the local government is so embroiled in blackmail and extortion by gangs that you have no recourse to the rule of law. You can't protect your family through the police,
Right.
because they're, being extorted or blackmailed by gangs. And so, the people that I've met here, they owe money in their home countries to get, bad people, criminals off their backs. They just need a way to come somewhere stable. And to be quite frank, United States foreign policy going back for 30 years or more did a lot to create the instability in Central America and South America.
Well, the whole banana republic. I mean, exactly. We say that, and if you go dig into it, you can see the seeds of everything that we're dealing with today, right there.
So, I don't know. I've met just young people who just want to live somewhere stable where they can work for their money and, make money and feed their families and take care of their families and have their kids educated and all the things that we want. There's a narrative out there that's pro-immigration, but it talks all about the great things that immigrants have done, or the great things that immigrants do. Steve Jobs was an immigrant, and he was a Syrian immigrant.
Okay.
And there's a time and a place for that, and it's good to highlight these stories. I think it's really good.
Sure.
But I'm also thinking that we can just be for the immigrant who just wants to, just be.
No, I get it. I mean, it's interesting how I'm listening to this, and I really guess I haven't really sat and meditated on this enough, but I keep thinking and making comparisons to the Tibetan people. I mean, I can actually find a lot of the answers in that whole thing. I'm watching that country. So we've got a leader who shuts the borders to protect the country, right?
Right.
But ultimately, there is another a stronger foreign power, China, who eventually says that the Tibet belongs to us and we're taking it back by force. Okay.
Right.
Tibet has cut off all of its relationships at that point with every country. Has no allies because it closed down its borders 50 years prior. No one came to their aid. China marches in, takes over, and they're still there to this day.
Right.
And then the whole Tibetan government and culture really is dependent on the mercy of India.
Yeah.
Because now they're in the foothills of the Himalayas in Dharamsala. They've got the government in exile. So it's a weird twist on the whole thing. You go, if India said, well, no, you can't come here.
Then what?
So what happens to all the Tibetan culture, all the people, all those refugees, basically, of the Chinese cultural revolution? I don't know. I think about it now in that context of what's going on here, and I'm like, shutting off borders just doesn't seem like it plays out good any time. I mean, go back to the 80s, to the wall. I mean, the falling of the wall, we celebrated that.
Right.
Why? I don't know. There's just, you can see it throughout history. It just doesn't seem to work out.
And that is why, I say it's like an old school conservative libertarian opinion. And most people would not accuse me of being a libertarian. But when it comes to movement, I really just think it's going to happen. It's what we do. And we just have to let it, and we have to navigate security concerns, of course.
Sure.
But that's what intelligence is for.
Yeah, doing the right thing's a harder job.
It is.
Right? I mean, in that situation, a wide brush strokes don't always seem to work.
Right.
Because there's too much color in there. There's too much diversity and too many different situations. And when you drop a big brush stroke, which, I mean, honestly, a closed border is a big brush stroke, it affects people negatively because of just different dimensions that each person's story carries in it.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes.
I mean, that all seems easy. Now I hear arguments where people say, well, if you love it so much, let them come live at your house. That's an argument. Have you heard anything like that?
I've heard people say that, yeah.
What do you think about that?
I've tried. My husband is like, we don't have the space right now, but if you let us finish this home edition, then sure.
Okay, so someone asks you that, you say, hey, there is potential there.
And people won't ask. Yeah. But I've offered, okay, no one likes to share their home with strangers.
Sure.
Or even with relatives. I've done it before. I've house shared. It's hard to navigate. And and you don't have any privacy. Like, you can't walk out, the towels are in a basket in this room, and, I'm stepping out of the shower. Like, you can't do that when you're house sharing. And so the sponsors of people, they've put themselves in this situation. They've allowed themselves to house share for however long they're going to need to. And so I've been like, well, come sleep at my house to give them a break, and you get a break, and we'll take the kids to the park or something on the weekend. So that kind of thing is what I can offer right now. But I haven't talked my husband into offering like actual long-term house sharing, because we've done that before with family, and it was hard enough with family.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Listen to what you're saying. It does make sense. I mean, I think about what you just said, privacy and the luxury of privacy.
Yeah.
Some people don't. Privacy is not even a part of their life.
Nope.
Nope. Living in groups and shelters and things like that. That's no privacy.
Right.
And then you got people that are completely invading every detail of your life.
I think that there's a mental toll, even if you're used to it. That there's some just human need for, your downtime. And so, I don't know. I know that it's a humbling and even humiliating situation to be in, to have, to come here with nothing and depend on people that you don't even know if you can trust.
Sure. That's the hard part, right?
Yes. There have definitely been people that I worked with, and they're like, I'm sorry, but the people that I'm talking to, they say I shouldn't trust you. And I'm like, I don't blame you, and I wouldn't necessarily, just trust somebody either. I can tell you, you're probably wondering, like, why do you don't know me? Why are you involved in this? Like, does it just make you feel good about yourself?
Sure.
And I just say, like, some of my best friends have pleaded and been granted asylum. I've been interested in that, and that's where my entry point is, and I ended up just doing this work, and I don't mind doing it. So people will, to provide for their kids, if they have kids with them, they'll place themselves in situations that they don't necessarily trust to get the things they need to provide for their children.
That's the thing.
You and I would
you're right. I mean, that's the thing I keep hearing. People say that in defense of supporting, asylum seekers, is that, what would you do if it were you, if your country is falling apart, and you're trying to get out of a bad situation, a dangerous situation. But I think it's hard for us in the security of and comfort of it is very hard.
Being in that situation.
I hear this, and I brought it up on the show a few times. I always hear, when I talk to soldiers who have been served in foreign wars and some really war-torn countries, or when I talk to someone who maybe is just serving in an organization of some kind overseas, when they come back, there's almost like a jaded period where it's hard to fit back in, because they feel, I've heard these words specifically, everyone here is walking around in a lie. This is not what's going on out in the world, and it's not real. Like, and that's almost like a negative, sour tone, but it's just very hard for some people to get back into it, because they've seen some shit, the other side, right? Yeah, but we don't see that day to day, so
we don't.
It's harder to find your empathy. No, there was a show, and you would probably enjoy it, and I can't remember the title. I'm going to have to think of it and send it to you, but it was an empathy project where they tricked this guy. They tricked this guy into becoming more empathetic to a foreigner to see if he would actually take a bullet for them.
Oh, wow.
But they picked somebody who was very against immigration and foreigners, and he was all about English, the typical mindset that you would encounter. And so this guy's a mentalist, he does like magic and things like that.
Oh, wow.
And so he puts him through this process. He makes the guy think that he's training for, I believe it was a TV show, but he has to do all these different things, and he plants triggers in him. But over the course of this, there was one part where he did a DNA test on the guy. And he showed him his ancestry results.
Right.
And he was very against Muslims, Middle Eastern people. He had a lot of opinions about that. But when they showed him his lineage, they did show him that he had ancestors in there, and he was a little disturbed, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the next phase was they put him in a room sitting across from a Middle Eastern man, but they couldn't speak.
Right.
They just sat in a room in total silence and stared at each other. And it was not too long after they gave him that DNA result. And the guy just started weeping.
Yeah.
His heart, I mean, no words were said, and the guy just hugged him, and he cried, and he cried, and he cried. And long story short, in the end, he did eventually take a fake bullet he didn't know for
he
a foreigner.
thought he was taking a bullet for him.
Yeah, yeah. It was a fascinating thing, and then it changed the guy's life.
Well, and you know that I find that people who seem more likely to spout opinions on Facebook that seem very like, well, you know, I don't know about the wall, but we need more border security, and this really is a problem. When you, on a personal level, say, hey, I have this friend, he's new here, he's here, you know, he's here claiming asylum, ICE vetted him and brought him through, and, you know, he hasn't had his hearing yet, but so, like, right now, you know, he's not undocumented, but he's, you know, he's an asylum seeker who has not yet been granted asylum, and I don't speak Spanish. Can you help me translate this? Or, you know, I want to get a king cake for them. Can you pick it up for me? Or, you know, like just something like that.
Yeah.
People will, yes, they'll absolutely do it. I think that people want to do good things the same way that, you know, I don't know where I'm going with this exactly. I think that people want to help and people want to be hospitable, and if they're anything like me, like, they take it really personally if someone comes to Lake Charles and doesn't like it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I want people to love it here, because it's home. And even if they maybe on a policy level are not looking like as extreme, I don't know how extreme it really is, but as extreme as I am, where I think our asylum laws really, really need to be revisited, because as they stand, you have to be fleeing persecution because of your race, religion, political opinion. Your government has to be after you, basically. And we have more threats than just totalitarian governments in today's world. We have MS-13, we have ISIS, we have just situations that we don't even really know about here, that we're totally bubbled off from, like your soldier guests have told you.
Yeah.
That our asylum laws need to be revisited, and people will say, we can't. What about our vets and homeless? What about the people here who already need our help? What about the people here who can't make any money? What about,
Sure.
Are we a capitalist nation or not? Like, is the market gonna make room?
Yeah.
Or not?
And that what you're saying right there has always bugged me. I don't know. I probably don't have an educated take on it, but something about that has just always ate at me when someone uses that as a justification to, shun another person. When you say, I'm not saying you're saying this, but like when I hear someone say, well, what about these people? And it's like, so are you saying that if we don't help them, then that need is going to, that their needs are going to be met? And that's not the case at all.
That's not the case. And even if it were, are you saying humans aren't creative enough to
then
come
we're
up
getting
with a solution? Because we are.
You're getting into that faith thing, see, and what you believe about humanity.
Maybe so.
Children of God, right? I mean, so you believe you're a child of the Creator.
Right.
Okay. That for me is, if I believe that, which I do, that I am born of a Creator, I have no more value or less value than any other child of the Creator. If I really believe that, I can't hold a view that says, well, I can't do that. They don't deserve. Right. They deserve the same things I deserve.
The logical conclusion of recognizing inherent dignity in a human person is that human person, there are certain things that are befitting human dignity, being treated with respect and kindness, and being regarded as worthy of basic needs being met, and being regarded as worthy of being able to pursue virtue. And if you're living somewhere where people are out to destroy your life or your family or your whole city or your whole village, there's no space for you to pursue virtue or to even do more than live in constant anxiety.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that's why I just
feel like humans are creative enough to make room. What? That's really what I think.
Sure. Well, there was room enough in creation for us.
Right.
I mean, people will say that if humans blinked out, the earth would stay. The earth's not dependent on us at all. We have this consciousness and this sort of ego that makes us think we're highly important, but if we blinked out,
the universe doesn't need us.
No, it doesn't need us, but we arose out of it, out of this process, whatever process ultimately is creation. We arose out of it and developed consciousness and awareness and identities and all of that, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess for me, it always comes down to that gets into that core belief. I mean, I can't, even my enemy, I'd have very few, but there are people that just, you're not going to get along with. And, even them, even out when you get through with a bad altercation, perhaps, sitting back, I can still see humanity in that person and take a moment and at least see that there's a trail of tears that has led to this most of the time, that's made this situation or made them an aggressor or whatever it may be. Ultimately, though, it gets back. I think about that when I think of border security. I go, but I still have to protect my family in person.
Of course.
But at the same time, can you do that with compassion? There's a saying in the Tao Te Ching that I always love, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's to the effect of a man enters into battle as if entering a funeral, as if a man enters into conflict or battle as if attending a funeral. And I've always liked that saying because it's how I've always felt about conflict.
Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah, we live in sort of a rah-rah culture, I think, or we have anyway, where it's team mentality. And boy, I'm going to go off here for a second. So this goes back to something my dad said. When my dad was younger, my dad was a Vietnam veteran. Served in some pretty bad situations. I mean, terrible things, that he's talked about and that he saw. And my dad was a patriot.
Right.
Loved his country. When he was younger, and I would listen to his stories versus when he was older. Okay, that's what I'm kind of about to talk about. So he would talk about that very patriotically, about being a soldier, being in the Vietnam War. I remember one time in class, we were studying the Vietnam War, and our teacher said, well, we didn't win that war. We left Vietnam. And so I went home, and my dad knew my dad was in it, and I talked about it. He got angry because he said, we didn't lose. He got really upset.
Oh.
And I offended him. I knew I did. And I was like, so that's important to him to know that we didn't lose. And I was like, that's interesting because it reminded me of the way we think of teams. My team lost, their team won. Many, many, many years later, my dad eventually got sick from Agent Orange exposure and passed away. But thank you. He talked about it in a totally different light. One time he was listening to a radio show about the Vietnam War, and we were in the same vehicle, and he got really quiet, and he said, I don't know why we were over there anymore.
Wow.
And I'm thinking it took his whole life, and he completely 180'd on that. And didn't mean he didn't love his country or it was the tone of remorse. I could tell in that moment, the gravity of all the pain, all the suffering, everything, even his own illness was weighing on him. And it was like he was attending a funeral. It was like this is a sad thing that we have to do violence, that we have to do war, that we have to have conflict.
Yes.
It's not something we should revel in, and we should never
cheer it on,
have
like
a parade about it.
Right.
But we celebrate it.
Yeah, like it's a football game.
Like it's a football game. They're the bad guys, we're the good guys. Mm-hmm. And I think you can think that way, like it's a funeral, and still love your country
or your team or your
But that's a hard conversation
heritage.
to have.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like loser talk. You know what I mean? Like that's unpatriotic. And I've come to believe that it's not. I think it might be highly patriotic.
It reminds me a little of the organization called the Jewish Voice for Peace. They work toward justice for Palestinians. And it doesn't mean that they have like self-hatred of themselves as Jewish people. And it doesn't even mean that they don't think that that there should be a Jewish presence or a formal Jewish state in the Middle East. But they recognize that it's ancient land, and so there are these two tribes, so to speak, who have equal claim to it from different time periods.
Yeah.
And their focus is really on pointing out that you can be pro-Palestine and still be an observant Jew, or just a cultural Jew. There are many Jewish people who don't practice their religion, but that you can be proud of your history as a Jew, and that it is your history as a Jewish person that informs your belief that that what's happening to the Palestinians and what's been happening to the Palestinians, especially since the 68 conflict, but even before to the 48 conflict, that it's not it's not moral.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was having this conversation with my wife about diversity and being accepting of, and not just accepting. I don't even like that word. Sometimes the word accepting is deceptive. Like actually eager to learn about other cultures, right? And to actually enjoy that, and just like having a new meal.
Right.
In fact, Thich Nhat Hanh...
Cuisine is a perfect entry point into making, into cultural...
Thich Nhat Hanh said something in the book Living Buddha, Living Christ, what I loved, and it was, he was... they were having a convention about an interfaith convention, interreligious convention. And one of the Catholic priests had got up and said, now look, I know we're going to be talking about, Buddhism and Christianity, but we're not making a fruit salad. And so Thich Nhat Hanh came up next, and he said, this is all he said was, I love fruit salad. And I love that verse, or that line, because I'm like, so what's the aversion to having... to these beautiful things come together and make something beautiful and new that can work together? It's just a lovely thing. I don't know.
It is. But yeah, cuisine. I mean, guys, if you're listening and you live in Lake Charles and you've ever had thoughts about, just fears or anxieties about people moving here, but you eat at Toga Grill or Taco Mel or Peronia's or... Tony's Pizza, they're Greek, or Cousins, or Mazins. I mean, think about it for a minute, because this cuisine is part of what makes Lake Charles like the hidden jewel of a food city that we are, because we really are, and we're getting more and more recognition for that. And also, if your last name is Broussard or Thibodeau, or Terrio.
Right. Terrio. That's my
mom's maiden name is Terrio.
Wow, that's my great-grandfather's name. Okay. Emile Terrio.
Well,
my middle name is Emile,
Okay. Well, we're probably related.
Somewhere down the line, yeah.
My mom can figure it out.
That's so fascinating. When you said Terrio, I don't hear it very often.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't. Well, because, so my
people are from, they settled Terrio, Louisiana.
Okay.
In Lafourche Parish. Or maybe Terrebonne Parish. And then moved more toward like Kaplan, Abbeville, Perry.
I tried to trace my great-grandfather's ancestry, but it just peters out around World War One.
My mom can help you.
Yeah, we've dug a bit, but I'm just using online tools.
Yeah.
the records just kind of stop around his. Now he had as we understand, he had a sister, and then my grandmother's mother just sort of disappeared and left and moved away. So we don't know who she was. She never talks about her. So yeah, I mean, and he only spoke French. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I can remember him very well when I was little.
Well, my family that I can recall that spoke French also spoke English, but they would speak French around all the kids when they didn't want us to know what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So many of us have memories of that. And
that's right.
But we were taking French in school, so we thought, if we listen hard enough, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We never really did.
Yeah, I remember he would say, I think they always just think it was funny because he would say like a cuss word in French. And they would go, do you know what he's saying? And the little thing, and you didn't know when you were a kid, of course. But yeah, his name was Emile, but we called him Papa.
Papa.
Yeah, and so I'm actually very proud of that middle name. I mean, I don't say it too often, but when people ask, it's different.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I have a little. It's funny how things pop up in your life at the right times, but my grandmother, when I was in my 20s, had gave me his rosary and some of his medals that he had. But there was this one medal, and I keep it on my rosary. But it was just an aluminum scapular medal with the Sacred Heart on one side, and it was just honestly scratched to pieces. You could tell there was a figure, and that I assumed it was Christ. But I loved that medal particularly because the features are all worn off of it. And I used to meditate on it, and I still do, that when I look at that Christ, he doesn't look like anybody. Doesn't look like a man or a woman. I just know it's Christ.
Wow.
And I love that about it. I love that particular thing because it's a wonderful meditation to just go, what is, again, you said universalism. That's where I start to dive into that territory, because start entering into that universal Christ, that idea that sort of gets beyond skin and bone and teeth, and that's the magic stuff.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned this because I learned to pray the rosary at the bedside of my great-grandmother, Mama Ontario.
Isn't that something? Yeah. That ancient, I say ancient, for me it's ancient because I didn't know him. I mean, I was a little boy, and so there's no way for him to share his faith and what got him through hard times. I mean, as a World War I veteran and all these things, and raising my grandmother as a single father in a time period where Great Depression, poor, but he went to La Salette here in Sulphur. He would walk through the woods.
Wow.
Because there weren't a lot of roads, he walked through the woods. So
it's a good Our Lady of La Salette.
But yeah, I mean, many years later even though I had those items, I didn't actually explore the faith, immediately. Right. And it was years later, again, meditating on those items where I kind of entered back through that door. So in a way, it was his blessing to me, and I love that.
Yes.
I love that. It's just something to. Because in my family, we weren't Catholic, he didn't pass that on. So I kind of wanted to make that full circle and kind of bring that part of that back.
So you were not baptized as a baby?
No.
Wow.
No, I could actually, this is interesting how this is shaping up. So
I know.
My Catholic faith journey has been kind of a blessing, but also tumultuous. I have a lot of factors in my life that are just oddball things that don't quite plug in very well with the Catholic faith. Yeah. And I will say this, the way it can be expressed. The way it's expressed, particularly possibly in where I live. Okay. Yeah, I'll say it that way. And that's not to mean that I have not met loving, beautiful people, and who am I to judge anybody?
Yeah, no, same.
But there's just factors like, for one, and I mean, I talk about on the show all the time, my son is gay. So right off the bat, there is a level of non-acceptance. In this language that I have a hard time with, intrinsically disordered.
My sister's gay.
Okay, so you know the drill. Yeah, you know the drill.
I do.
And so, I mean, I've talked about this with the last guest. I said, I've never once looked at my son and said, my gay son. I say he's gay only to express the thing that we deal with. Yeah. But that has nothing to do with him. It has to do with other people. Yeah. Right? He's just my son, and I'm just his father. So that doesn't even play in, but it plays into other people.
Right.
For what for their expectations
They're always,
are.
they wonder about if the way you're parenting him is
Right.
Expressing his true dignity, or if it's just coddling his disorder or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
I
Like
know what you mean.
it's
I've
the
been in this discussion
you
so many
have, and
times.
I mean, and
it is one of the major points of tension that I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I struggle with that, and I've struggled with it because I can't have fully open and loving conversations. That part always would turn sour.
Yeah.
One thing that really was hard for me has been praying publicly with others, because a lot of the prayers are about same-sex relationships, and and about the gay agenda, and so when I'm in a public group and those are the prayers that are being said out loud, but I'm internally praying for my family and my son, who is the very person I've struggled with that. With it.
Yep. Right there with you.
So I've tried to share the faith with my son, and I find that has been very, very difficult. It's a hard thing, and he's had a hard time with it because he feels like he's seen as other or different. So
intrinsically disordered.
That's very difficult. I don't know, and it's not that again, and you said at the beginning, the Eucharist is such a big part.
A source and summit, as they say.
And so once you've discovered that truth, and that's in your life, that's it just complex.
And I really think it's the single most beautiful religious teaching in the history of humanity, and and it's inextricable from so much else. But I'm really interested in the question of what it is extricable from, and what teachings will develop, and how they will develop over time. So I don't know.
You just said exactly.
I just have to live in the tension right now.
That's right.
And our ancestors had to do the same thing.
No, that's interesting. That's kind of what we've been talking about, is how these cycles just sort of repeat themselves.
And speaking of Catholicism and immigration, there was a time when we were the Muslims, so to speak.
Right.
We were the invaders who were going to be more faithful to the church than to the rule of law in our land, the way that people talk about what they call Sharia law, which they don't really understand what Sharia law is. Islam,
you hear it thrown around, and you just accept the cult, whatever's being blasted out there, right?
Yeah, and it's a very just narrow, twisted definition of what that is. I mean, the equivalent for us is canon law. You know what I mean? It's all the minutia, and Islam, of course, is it's all based in jurisprudence. There's no central teaching authority. There are just courts upon courts upon courts. Yeah. And the court's purpose is to work out the details, the ever evolving, rulings about the way people conduct themselves in everyday life. Yeah. And so it's not as simple as Sharia law says a woman needs to be stoned, or Sharia law says throw gay people off of buildings, or whatever it is that people say. It's nothing to do with that. But there were those fears about us, and Thomas Nast, the famous cartoonist, and his Condé Nast, like the publishing arm, the publishing brand, they were so afraid of Catholics, and there are all these cartoons of these crocodiles with Pope hats, swimming onto our shore. And that was. I don't know how people who are Catholic can participate in this fear of people who just happen to be practicing their faith and living their lives and want to do that here.
Yeah, it's interesting how persecution breeds.
Your grandparents did too.
It breeds extreme. One extreme breeds another type of extreme. It's like the whole gunpowder treason story. Yeah. That whole plot, that Guy Fawkes story, it comes right out of Protestant persecution of Catholics, which gives rise to rebellion.
Right.
and ultimately what they would have labeled him a terrorist, right? I mean, by today's standards, those gentlemen, now they're heroes, but to the Catholic faith, but they were terrorists to... It just gets into this situation where you're going, the pressure from one side creates a pressurized version on the other side. And if we could just get out of that cycle, man, I mean, but it just seems to never end.
I know. What if we could all just solve our problems with chess matches?
Yeah, I know. It doesn't make any sense, but one man has to go kill another. It just, I don't know, the cycle of violence is just so... I don't know. And then on one hand, you know, I think about this sometimes. Comparatively, is the world worse than it used to be? I mean, in a lot of ways, it's better. I mean, there's a lot of advancements and things that people have accomplished.
We have the technology to communicate with people who don't speak our language, whose language we don't speak, like Google Translate.
Sure.
We have the technology to see the world through the eyes of people all over the world using Instagram or Snapchat or Periscope. We get so many perspectives, and it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I really think it is. We live in a time where we can be exposed to so much that isn't filtered through, you know, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but that isn't filtered through, you know, major media conglomerates or you know, whatever. We live in a time where independent media can thrive. We live in a time where the president uses Twitter.
Right.
And I mean, there
right.
There are, you know, this particular president's use of Twitter is, I mean, even his fans don't always like it.
Sure.
But we live in a time where we have direct access to other people and their thoughts in ways that never, you know, nobody had that before.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing, and it can really be harnessed. I hope.
No, I think you're right too. That's, you know, for doing good
things and communicating. And I know that people are down on so-called armchair activists who just sit around on social media and talk and solve the world's problems but aren't doing anything. But, you know, maybe I just take it personally, but because I spent so many years with little kids at home and I couldn't do as much, I didn't have the bandwidth to do as much, but conversation, I think we've really seen, shapes policy.
No, I mean, you have to get information out there and have
conversations. Discourse, you know, if we don't control the discourse, we people who care about justice, if we don't control the discourse or attempt to really, you know, insert ourselves into the discourse, then the discourse is taken over by, you know, propaganda that's rooted in fear.
Yeah. It gets back to team mentality. You can sort of just say, okay, I've made up my mind about this, and I'm going to go have a conversation. I'm making quotey fingers right now. A conversation about this. But when we enter the conversation, we've already entered it with a moat around our ideas and a barbed wire fence around them, and all the guns are ready to fire. So we're not really having a conversation. Yeah. We're just defending our position.
I'm totally guilty of that, though.
But on the same time, are you open to having your mind changed?
Sometimes.
I mean, if you get new information, and you've tested it, you know, that was one of the things that always attracted me to Buddhism was what he said. Don't trust what I've said. Go test it. You know, test it like gold. You know, to see if it's actually what I'm saying it is. And so I'm open to having my mind change if I get new information and I have the opportunity to test it, you know, and actually do some digging. But I don't like making decisions on limited information quickly. Yeah. You know, because then I'm just doing the same thing, you know. I'm guilty. I mean, I've done that even with social media. I get a piece of information like anybody else and it looks like an atrocity. And I just get that immediate like knee-jerk reaction. And then I go, oh, you know, well, I didn't have all the information. But most of us live our lives with only pieces of information. Yeah. You get what you get.
And we get more than people used to get.
Right. We almost some people say we have too much information. I don't know that. I think having...
I think if you curate what you take in...
Yes, that's right.
I know, and that's kind of a buzzword, but...
No, but I agree with it.
Curate what you take in.
True.
But the other side of curating what you take in is the whole, what people call the echo chamber.
Yeah, you can end up in that situation.
You can.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm guilty on all those fronts. I mean, I try not to do that. I do like to hear opposing viewpoints. I don't know.
I'm totally guilty of reading the comments.
Yeah, the comments. Yeah. But you have some pretty... You manage your comments well.
On my personal stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's my terrain.
Yeah.
And
you let people know what the rules are.
Yes.
And I like that because it's like, behavior that gets sort of abrasive or just out of line...
I shut that down.
Vile, you're done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do that for work, so it's just second nature to me. We have a fan community that's pretty large, 15,000 people.
Yeah, that's pretty large.
So we have to manage it pretty strictly, and I have an amazing team of volunteer moderators that really do the legwork there. But I created the handbook. Yeah. So I kind of follow the same handbook rules on my own personal social media. Yeah. And it works.
Yeah. No, it seems to. I mean, I do read your comments. There are certain people where...
But do you read KPLC comments?
No, I don't. I quit doing that years ago. I actually don't even follow that news feed anymore. Not because of KPLC necessarily, just because it turned into it's just a beehive of kind of whatever. It's a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is that sort of what led you to finding the good news?
No, it is actually. This is, again, it's another...
Yeah.
Without that, this doesn't happen, you know? I mean, that could happen to this, because we don't always talk about things that people agree with.
Right.
And they don't agree with maybe everything I say or whatever a guest says. I guess getting back to what we were talking about, I hope that they'll at least consider, or if we do say something on this show that someone just says, hey, I don't agree with that, maybe at least go, well, why don't I agree with it?
Right.
This past weekend I was just visiting with my son and he was taking some political opinions and I said, well, and I didn't disagree with him, but I was like, well, why do you feel that way? Give me a list. And, it was an interesting exercise because you realize a lot of people are upset, but they don't know why.
Right.
They don't like something, but they don't know why. And so, I'm guilty.
Yeah.
I need to just do my own due diligence and dig a little bit. You can get gridlocked to trying to live like that.
Yeah.
Always never making a decision because you don't have all the information,
Right. And at some point, I think if we have first principles that are grounded in like a moral code that we operate from, then we're going to be able to evaluate things through that filter. But when our moral code gets challenged, that's when we feel like we don't have the equilibrium to, and that's what your son's a teenager?
Yeah, 15.
Yeah, he's the perfect age to be, influenced in so many directions. When I was 15, I was reading Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
But we all go through that phase for a minute, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm influenced by what I've read in my life. There's no doubt about it. I mean, some things I read when I was younger that I don't go back to, but some things really stuck, and they shaped, the course of my life, my thinking. Yeah. And so there
are some things I loved and held as close to my identity, and then in adulthood, filtering them through my moral code and my understanding from learning more about like the history of racism and white supremacy, I go back and I'm like, it's a big cringy moment.
Yeah.
Annie, Get Your Gun. Have you seen that movie?
No.
Well, there's a whole lot of just anti-Native American stereotypes, and at the time, people will say, "Oh, it's just entertainment. It's lighthearted," but there are just all these cultural questions to consider as we push as far past that phase of this country's history as we can at the at the highest speed possible, please.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's the thing that
it's time to catch up.
It's time to catch up. Yeah,
and so a lot of catching up is going to be people who've benefited from not having to be hurt by these narratives. developing the empathy to realize, like, yeah, it seems small to me, but if it doesn't seem small to my neighbor, then I need to give it up, because our future and our shared humanity is more important than, you know, my sports team keeping the mascot, or you know, this, my beloved Peter Pan, or Annie Get Your Gun, or,
I mean, that gets into, like, tradition of any kind. When tradition is detrimental to one particular group of people, is that not a tradition we shouldn't be revisiting?
Right.
You know,
not everything is worth protecting, even as we do protect our, you know, our heritages and preserve our cultural identities.
No, I totally agree. I think we're in a lot of ways, I think we can end up building kind of false idols out of that kind of stuff. You know, a tradition that is something that probably maybe had value at a certain point in the world, but as we've moved forward and we've changed as a species, as a creature, you know, it's time to rethink that. We have a problem with that, though. We do. I think we have trouble doing that.
We do.
You know?
Even I'll find there are some, all throughout the world, all throughout the world that observes Mardi Gras, there are some very problematic blackface traditions. And those are even right here, you know, in Louisiana. I'm not talking about Zulu, like New Orleans. I don't feel like that's my lane to comment. But here in the Cajun tradition, white people in blackface, and people will say, "What? But, you know, the people of color do it too." Well, okay,
yeah, but
can we still examine this critically? I think that we need to, and I think that there are more and more. I don't go to the careers, but I know that at least one of them doesn't allow blackface anymore. And people will get defensive of the tradition. And even I sometimes do. Like, if someone else is commenting on it, I'm kind of like, I can talk about my mama, but you can't talk about my mama. You know what I mean?
No, I get it. Totally.
But it's not, I mean, that's really not the most consistent response. Like, I think that we can analyze this critically and look at it objectively and see that it's time to catch up. It's time to move past that. And that doesn't mean throw out Mardi Gras.
Yeah. No, you don't throw, what's the old saying? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have to ask this question because I ask this of everybody, you know, with all the things you're involved with in the service that you're offering. Why do that instead of doing nothing? Because, I mean, you could not do anything.
Well,
because some people, you know, we all see the same thing. So
that's like not how my mama raised me.
There you go.
I don't know. Man, my mom has always been an example for me of being involved in service, and she has put aside a lot of her service lately to care for my youngest daughter while I work from home. But she's always been involved. She was a high school teacher for most of my life, and she would sponsor several clubs, and they did service work. And I don't know, it's just always been what I do. And there were years where I didn't have the bandwidth to do it. There was a time in my late teens, early 20s when I wanted to start a Catholic worker house, and I was really into Dorothy Day. And then instead I had kids and was like, well, I can't put my kids in a potentially dangerous situation, you know, because Catholic worker really involves sticking your neck out for people that, you know, you just don't know. Not all people are trustworthy. That's true. That's true. But anyway, I guess there's some selfishness to it. I feel more like myself when I have projects. And my husband points this out a lot. He's like, you have so much energy to pour out for these projects and for other people, and then not always for your own family. And that's true. And the Myers-Briggs personality, you know, I'm an ENFP. I'm a classic ENFP. So I have this extroverted energy that's so justice oriented, and then when I'm home, I just want to be quiet and I don't want to talk to anybody. And I mean, that's not always fair to my family.
But sometimes people, we are who we are. We're wired certain ways. I get that.
But I mean, I try not to be stuck in that.
Yeah.
Just so that my kids don't grow up with memories of mom always had energy for other people.
Right. You don't want that. Well, no, I get that. I do.
So,
I struggle with that too. I mean, I guess having a business and then doing the show, I mean, or anything. I mean, my heart's always going to be towards the downtrodden and the stranger.
Yeah.
And that isn't always a safe thing. And, you can't do what you can't do.
Right.
And that's hard sometimes when you want to do. No, I get that. And you're having to ask your family to come along on the journey.
Yeah.
It's not their choice.
Right. They didn't have really much of a say. I just started doing it. And then I was like, hey, you're going to help me make this delivery. Hey, kids, you're all coming too. There's some kids that you can play with while we're moving stuff. And the kids have been great about it.
It's probably going to shape them, though. I mean, and who knows? So. You hope it does. I mean,
like I was just talking about how my mom...
Right.
That's who she raised me to be, so this is what I'm doing.
Right. No, it makes total sense. I mean, that's what we hope, is that they keep the best parts of us and find their own way.
Yeah. Exactly.
So we have this part of this show called Fishing for Goodies.
Oh, wow.
And so this lovely fishbowl sitting here that's obscured by stickers.
I love it.
So each guest that's been on the show has drawn 3 questions out of there.
Oh, wow.
And then we discuss those questions.
Oh, okay.
I know what some of the questions are, but I don't know all of them. So there's a mix of like guest submitted questions, listener questions, some I've put in there, and then there's some from this deck called Wordsmith, which I really like. So who knows?
So pull 3 out.
Pull 3 out. You can take one at a time if you want, however you want to do it.
Do you prefer popcorn or candy with your movie or something else?
Now that's a simple question.
It is. Okay, I don't go to the movie theaters very often.
Okay, what about at home?
It's too loud. And at home, if I'm watching TV, I'm watching YouTubers.
Oh, really?
I'm watching makeup YouTubers.
Makeup YouTubers. Man, that is so popular.
That's my, and that's like kind of my, release or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't really like movies. They stress me out.
Do they?
Yes.
Like why?
They just do. I don't know.
All movies?
No, if I am familiar with it already, I'll watch it. But I don't like to watch new movies.
Really?
I have to really.
I've never heard that before.
It might be once or twice a year that I will watch something brand new to me.
And so that's interesting. So something brand new, is it just related to movies, or is that just like new things?
Pretty much any like media, like entertainment media. Like
really,
I'm still listening to the same music I was listening to in 2003 for the most part.
I understand that. I'm not. My music taste is all over the place. I don't listen to a lot of new stuff. It's mostly old.
Well, if I learn about anything new, it's from my husband or my kids.
That's exactly me too.
Occasionally World Cafe on NPR, but usually I'm just listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
So
well, you're not snacking on popcorn or candy.
I don't snack much while I'm watching YouTube because I'm usually folding clothes.
Ah, okay.
So no snacks. I guess if there's any snack, it's a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, that's good. That's interesting about the movies. I've never heard anybody say that before.
I'm just a weirdo. Okay. Oh, a card. Write a letter to someone who has impacted your life. Do I have to? You
don't have to write a letter. You can just tell me
who it would be. Oh man. Man, I don't know. There's so many people.
You have like a hinge moment in your life where something changed, where you're like, this is something that's like a push pin.
No. I'm just trying to think of who it could be. I mean, there's so many options. Oh my goodness.
That's a heavy question.
But the answer is just, it's pretty simple. It's not real deep. There's a comic book writer, and I don't actually read comic books. There's a comic book writer named G. Willow Wilson.
Okay.
And she wrote a memoir in her early 20s called The Butterfly Mosque, One Woman's Journey to Love in Islam. And she is an American who almost immediately after 9/11, ended up moving to Egypt to teach English after she graduated from Boston University, and ended up, like, she knew she was going to convert, and she converted
to Islam,
to Islam basically on the plane ride, but kept it a secret for a while, but then fell in love with an Egyptian man.
Really?
Anyway, so it's a memoir from her early 20s. And if I could write like that now, like she wrote in her early 20s. So really, it's just the beautiful writing of this memoir. And I interact with her some on Twitter, not as much as comic book people do. Like, I don't have as much, because she mostly talks about, she wrote the Miss Marvel series.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And
she's an Islamic character, right?
Yeah,
Miss
Kamala
Marvel.
Khan.
Yeah.
Kamala Khan is a Pakistani
okay.
Teenager. But she just wrapped up her last Miss Marvel because she's writing Wonder Woman now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And she's just an incredible mind. And the interviews that she gives just are so just pleasant to listen to. I just really love her brain.
Another person you're looking up on YouTube, right? You can watch her interviews.
I do watch her on YouTube, watch her interviews. Yeah, or listen to podcasts where she was interviewed.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't even read comic books, and I could listen to her talk about comics. It's just that I love her brain.
Yeah.
So that's who I'd write a letter to.
Well, that's cool. I never really thought about that person. I know the character Miss Marvel, and I guess I've never paid attention to who was the writer.
G. Willow Wilson.
And then I would have
But
never
now
known that she...
Saladin Ahmed, I think, is who is taking over the writing.
For Miss Marvel?
For Miss Marvel.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. That's a good one. I like that answer.
G. Willow Wilson.
Well, I learned something.
She has a new novel releasing next month, and I don't even read a lot of fiction, but I'm planning to read it. It's called The Bird King.
And so the way she impacted you was because of her writing, just her style,
her brain
just the way
is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, her brain is so beautiful.
I love that. I'm gonna have to look her up.
You should.
I will.
Okay. Have you ever stayed up for an entire 24 hours, and why? Oh, of course, in college.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Just because?
Exams or papers. Waiting to the last minute to write papers, things like that.
I think the only time I ever stayed up that I can really remember consciously making the choice was my buddy Kane was just trying to get one of his friends to watch Twin Peaks.
Oh my gosh, Twin Peaks is the scariest,
and we watched it.
Grossest thing.
Marathoned it.
No, that's probably why I don't like movies, because
from Twin Peaks.
Well, all that David Lynch shit.
Yeah, he's weird. Like,
because in high school and college, like, all the guys, they wanted to watch David Lynch, and you go on a date and they wanted to watch David Lynch anyway. Like,
it'll make you feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
Yeah, no, there's a vibe of it's just like, why do I feel
too much for me?
Yeah, well, he was really into it. He still is, and I watched it with him, and so we stayed up. We did like a 24-hour thing. Back then it was VHS tapes.
I've never made it past the second episode
of
Twin Peaks, and I've tried.
I love it. Funny story about that. My years later, that they were releasing after 25 years, the new season was coming out, and so I was like, I'm going to rewatch this. When my son got into it with me, and he's like, Dad, I'm the only teenager at school. When I say Twin Peaks, nobody knows what I'm talking about. I was like, well, no, man.
Well, when I was in high school, it was a thing.
Oh yeah,
at least in my group of friends.
I believe it. That's funny.
No way.
So
creepy.
If people want to help you in your endeavors, if they want to follow you and listen to what you have to say or anything you have going on, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can just request my friendship on Facebook. I'll friend you. And I'm going to give you a link to Immigrant Families Together's general fund, which raises money for bonds and travel fare for reunification of families.
Okay.
So when you promote this, I would love for you to share that.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, we put a link. We put links in every description.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So I want you to be able to share that, so that if people, not everybody can do more than give. So I try to make it easy for people to give. That's why I make an Amazon registry. Amazon, is all sorts of problematic, and but it's easy. And there's just got to be an easy way for people to.
It does seem that the way you handled that makes it easier for people to make an impulse decision and do the right thing.
I mean, I think a registry of 80 items were purchased within 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I was fascinated by that, the way you handled that, and I was like, I've never seen. Again, might be just my own ignorance, but I was like, I've never seen things coordinated like this before, and it just worked.
It was so simple.
You don't have to think about it too hard.
Yeah, and people usually have money set aside in their budgets to give.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who are not tithing right now with
Sure.
everything going on with the hierarchy. And,
Sure.
So they've just kind of rerouted their tithes to more direct ways of giving because they don't want to have to pay for diocesan lawyers to cover for bad behavior. So I think that, I've reached out to the right people at the right time lately.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there are just lots of people who set aside money to give, and it's an easy way for them to do it, and to know that what they're doing isn't, it's like directly impacting someone.
Right. It isn't trickling down through a big system.
Yeah.
It gets right to where it needs to.
Right to where it needs
Something
to.
somebody can use that's going to help.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, like we said, it's easy when you live in comfort. I think about that at night when I'm laying down with my little boy. Comfortable bed, air conditioned, full stomachs.
There are so many things. I made a registry to start with for a family, and it was mostly like clothes and towels and things like that. But there were things I didn't think of, like their house sharing, and they need a way to keep their stuff separate from the other family stuff.
Kind of storage.
So,
containers.
Organization and containers and things like that like we just take for granted. It didn't even occur to me.
Sure. Well, yeah, I get that, because just take your main piece of furniture or storage out of your life, and you've got things laying all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
And when in a shared space, that's going to be difficult.
That's going to be, and you already feel humbled enough that someone's letting you live in their home. You don't want to also, use their stuff or be in their way or so.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm actually really glad you took the time to come talk.
Good.
Yeah. I love finding people like you out there.
Well, Lake Charles has a lot of good people, and all of Southwest Louisiana. We just do.
Yeah, and that's what it seems to be.
This is home.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm learning it, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm hoping as time goes by that this becomes just an information hub, where people can just look to these conversations, or the people that have come on here and go, hey, who are they connected with, and connect the dots and find a way to volunteer, to serve, who knows, find employment, whatever it may be, and maybe even find a direction for their life. Some people are young and they don't know what they want to do, and they might be inspired to get involved in something.
I wish I had podcasts to listen to when I was 16.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had them too. Now it's addictive, and I hope there's more podcasts around here, because
I know.
I think that if there were more,
I was so excited to learn that there was a podcast in this area. I had no idea that there was something being produced here.
I think there's 3 or 4.
Really?
Yeah, one is and I've not communicated with these folks, but I've listened to a couple episodes. It's called Horror and Hops, which you might not like it because it's movies. But beer. Yeah. So they watch horror movies and they discuss them, and one person doesn't like, I think, as I understand it, isn't a fan of horror movies or hasn't seen a lot of horror movies, so they get to kind of have that reaction. So it's interesting conversations. And then there is another one, and I don't know the name of it, and I guess that's not a good thing if it didn't stick, but it's a business podcast, and I think they interview different business owners. It's like maybe Power Hour or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know. I feel bad that I don't know, honestly, but I haven't listened to that but one episode of that.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's the only ones that I know of. Oh, and then I think there's a financial advice one too.
Oh.
Brother and sister team. So there's not that many,
cool.
but hopefully as the area grows and changes, we'll see it rise.
We're seeing a lot of growth, and some of that is due to immigration. So
yeah, that's right.
People are going to just need to.
Well, one of our biggest clients, one of their things that's very important to them is that we have multicultural elements in the advertising that we produce. So we know that the sentiment's out there, that it's important. It's just, I don't know, just watching it change. Hopefully it's for the better.
Full speed ahead.
Yeah.
Full steam ahead. Whatever the I think it's full steam ahead because of steamboats or trains.
I don't know which one it is.
It's such an American saying.
It's funny. My son and I was about to end the podcast, but I don't know. Maybe you can tell me where this comes from. We were trying to figure out where the saying, you got the short end of the stick came from.
I don't know the history of that.
Me either. We had all kinds of theories. I was like, I've said that before, and I don't know.
I'm sure that Google could tell us.
Yeah, we just didn't look it up.
To talk about
it is
the possibilities.
Possibilities. What is the short end of the stick? We thought about that, but the short end of the stick was the part. I was like, does
not
that
the short stick.
Not the short stick, but the short end of the stick. I don't know. It could be one of those just funny sayings that doesn't mean anything.
Maybe. There are a lot of these idioms that we use all the time that are actually rooted in plantation and slavery culture, like cakewalk.
Yes. We were talking about this. We were listening to... God, this is terrible.
We're going to keep on going.
I know. This is terrible because of the subject matter, and I worry that people would really think... I don't want to propagate it, but the ice cream truck song.
Oh, I didn't know. Is that from minstrel shows?
Yes, and the lyrics are...
Oh, no, we don't...
horrendous.
Well...
And it was in an article I read one day, and it said, if you knew the history of this song, you wouldn't. And I looked it up, and I went,
it's time for some new music on our ice cream trucks.
But nobody knows. We don't know. We just,
but we don't need... I mean...
but that's one of those things we're talking about. Why not just, make the change?
Make the change. Just examine it critically and understand that whether you think it's a big deal or not... people who are directly impacted do.
Yeah.
So
someone knows, and it's
make the change.
Why not?
Why not? Full steam ahead.
Yeah, I love you.